Turn to your neighbor and tell them, Abba's got a word for you. Oh, I'm standing up here listening and you didn't convince me. I want you to say it one more time. Abba has a word for you. Hallelujah. I'm excited about this particular teaching simply because I believe that he's revealing some things to us that have been hidden, reserved for this particular season in our lives. You're going to hear some things this afternoon that I promise you that you've never heard before. And I was going to say, trust me. But I can't ask you to trust me. I'm asking you to do what 2 Timothy 2:15 says. Study, show yourselves approved unto Yahweh, workmen that need not to be ashamed by rightly dividing the word of his truth. We've arrived, I believe, in a period of time when we've crossed over some boundaries that we cannot go back the other way. I believe we're about to embark on a journey as a people, a called out, separated, holy convocation. And I believe that what Abba's about to do in the midst of his people is going to stagger the minds of those that are on the outside looking in. Yes, if you look at it from the natural, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. But if you look at it from the spirit realm, this is why you were born for this time. I believe that just as surely as Esther was told, for just such a time as this, you were born. And we're about to experience, Miss Jean, some supernatural phenomena that's going to awaken the earth and cause them to understand that Abba is really walking amongst his people. Having said that, as I just alluded to earlier, you're going to see some things this afternoon that you haven't seen before. And I believe that it's for a reason. Abba's challenging us to get outside of our comfort zone. If you're afraid for your truth to be tested, then it's not truth. Truth can stand scrutiny. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, truth can stand scrutiny. Truth can be tested. And if you look at this particular Torah portion, it's ironic because we were supposed to bring this word last week, but because of some inclement weather we had in this part of the country, we were unable to, and we had to postpone some things. But I'm still convinced that this is a pertinent word for where we're living right now. And the title of this word is Vayera, and it's rendered in the English as "and I appeared." Exodus chapter 6, verse 2 through chapter 9, verse 35. And it begins right in the middle of a conversation. If you're familiar with the parshah, you know that Yahweh is having a conversation with Moshe, and he's about to launch the whole experience of the Exodus into motion. He's getting Moshe prepared for a confrontation with Pharaoh. Listen to me, you are about to confront some Pharaohs in your life. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, if you've got problems handling the little boys now, don't fool with Pharaoh. If there's things in your lives now that's keeping you in bondage, leave Pharaoh alone until you get your house in order. What we're about to look at is a very powerful and puzzling dilemma. And if you go back and just study this from the perspective of the sages and rabbis, it's puzzled people because if you understand, like you guys did the Shema earlier, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our Elohim, Yahweh is one. If that's indeed the case, if you look in this particular Torah portion, he identifies himself to Moshe 3 different ways. El Shaddai, Elohim, and Yahweh. And so you have to ask yourself, what is he doing here? And there's no such thing as just filler material. When he identifies himself from a particular or specific perspective, it's to reveal part of his nature and part of his character for that particular season. And it does not ever do anything without he has an intended purpose. In fact, if you want to go back and look at how he lists the names of the children of Israel, if you go back and study the names of those 12 tribes of Israel, they're very prophetic about the redemption process that Yahweh had planned from the very beginning of the earth. But there are on several different places and several different occasions, you'll find those names are mentioned in different ways. But it doesn't change the significance of the prophecy inherent in those names. And what we have lost in the Western world is how important names are. Names are literally In my opinion, they are a living entity. When a name is released into the earth, and then that name is placed upon an individual, that individual will grow up into what that name surmises. You will become what you're named. Now, we understand that there's both a positive and a negative, a cursed and a blessing side of it. And I understand that. But you need to be careful about the words that come out of your mouth, the things that you say. You need to be careful about what you name things and what you allow to be spoken into your life, because you're going to see in this particular Torah portion that names are important. And so I want to call your attention to Exodus chapter 6, and we're going to begin in looking at verse 1 through verse 3. And Yahweh said unto Moshe, now shalt thou see what I will do to Pharaoh. Wow. How many of you wondered when Pharaoh is going to be dealt with? Well, this is where we're at right now in the sea. We're about to make the greater exodus, and so Yahweh is going to begin to speak to his people. I want you to just stand still and see what I'm about to do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand shall he let them go, and with a strong hand shall he drive them out of his land. Listen to me. When it comes time for us to make this greater exodus, the enemy is going to be glad to see you go. Say amen. Elohim spake to Moshe, and he said to him, listen to this, I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And I appeared unto Abram, Isaac, and to Jacob by the name of El Shaddai. But by my name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was I not known to them. But I want to just stop here and interject something else. Pharaoh is one of the principal characters in this particular Torah portion. And if you look at what his name literally means as it's translated, Paro, it literally indicates that it's rendered as his great house. And so Pharaoh was literally considered the deity, the principal deity of the country or the nation of Egypt. And so Paro, his house, represented the lineage, if you will, of the gods. And so he was the progenitor, if you will. He was the one that would initiate a race of living beings. That's what he looked at and identified himself as. And so now you find that there's a contest going on between the house of Israel, who represents the house of Yahweh, and Paro, his great house. I want you to understand that because it's crucial for you to understand what's going to be revealed in the next few minutes as we look at this. The language is peculiar in this parshah, and it's there for a reason. It's obvious, even though it seems as if Yahweh saying, you know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they knew me as El Shaddai, but they did not know me as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. But if you study your Torah, you'll find that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahweh, is the way I'm choosing to share it with you this afternoon. Some people say Yahuwah, some other different renderings, but please don't get upset when I say Yahweh, and go back and insert whatever you want there. But his name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, has actually been known in the text since Genesis chapter 2. It was known, therefore, by Noah, Abram, Jacob, and Joseph, and it's my contention that it was known by this particular Pharaoh. Even though Exodus chapter 5, verse 2 says otherwise, that Pharaoh says, I don't know Joseph, and I don't know Yahweh. And I'm going to prove to you that that was a sarcastic, condescending statement that he was making. He was literally flaunting the fact that he was choosing to denigrate and not understand and identify and acknowledge the God of Moshe, or the house of Israel, known as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So when he's saying, I don't know him, that's what he's, oh, I'm ignorant. Who is this guy? That's actually what's being said. So you have to ask yourself, why is he identifying himself to Moshe at this particular time? Now, he does say, when he brings Moshe before Pharaoh, there's a prophetic declaration, I believe, that's being revealed here. I believe by the three different names that he shares, Yahweh, El Shaddai, and Elohim, that he's actually carrying us all the way back to the inception of creation. And then it is bringing us forward to where Moshe and Israel are at the present. But I also believe that it's reaching into the days that you and I are living in, and even further into the future. And so every one of these names fit the redemption narrative. And Brittany did a marvelous job when she was sharing just a couple of weeks ago regarding El Shaddai and Elohim. But I'm convinced that it not only takes us back to Genesis chapter 1, but it brings us to where you and I are living at, and it's extremely pertinent. And I want to spend some time focusing on who this Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is, because you're going to find the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is extremely important to not only you and I from a Hebraic Torah observing community. It's important to the Jewish community, even though they're careful not to pronounce the name. And I'm going to show you that I believe that they are in error there, because I am convinced that Abba expects his name to be known and spoken and invoked, just like Shepherd John was alluding to earlier. And it's also important whether the church understands it, because the New Testament is literally rife with references to this individual known as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and a specific manifested presence who claimed title to this name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And I'm going to show you who he is. The Strong's Concordance has Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, number 3068, translated as the existing one. It comes from a very powerful root. The word is chaya, and it means to become, to appear, to arise, to take place, to stand, or also to accompany. And if you go back and look at the creation account of Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, you'll see this root chaya, and it seems to suggest wherever that root chaya is used, that the subject actually existed originally in another realm, in a spirit realm, before this entity who is being referred to or used by this term chaya was actually physically, quote unquote, in the earth. And you can see that in Genesis chapter 2, verse 5. And it says, and every plant of the field before YHVH, the root there is chaya, it was in the earth, and every herb of the field, YHVH, the same root, chaya, before it grew. And so it's indicating that even before it manifested itself in the earth, that entity that's being referenced here existed. In other words, it was. Does that make sense? And when you see the root chaya, it actually begins to give you the idea that something is about to appear or arise, and it actually indicates like a sign that's being raised or put in front of you that's predicting or prophesying of someone or of something long before it's ever seen. And I know that's foreign to many of us, but most of you are familiar with Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 that says, now faith is. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. That's exactly what this word chaya, the root of it, actually indicates. It existed before you see it in the natural realm. Does that make sense? And so if that's the case, then the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh must have been in evidence at creation's beginning before it was ever spoken or written in the supernatural heavens. And this is who's being identified to Moshe. I want you to tell them Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. He could have said El Shaddai. He could have said Elohim. But he chose Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh for a specific reason. Listen to me. And he chose Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh for a specific season. And I'm here to tell you that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the manifest presence that's represented by that name, is also connected, and I don't believe that you can separate the two from the Melchizedek priesthood. I am convinced that the priest of the earth was represented by this Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And I'm also convinced that as we see the restoration of the understanding of the Melchizedek priesthood now in this season we're living in, juxtaposed to the Levitical priesthood, that you're also going to see the demonstration of the manifest presence of the name as it is placed upon the Melchizedek priesthood and the restoration of that. I don't know if you can grasp it, but I'm telling you it's happening as we speak. I want you to look with me at the Hebrew word for heavens, Shemayim. It has the root Shin Mem for Shem, which is translated as name. The word Shem indicates the character of an individual that's embodied in that name. And in fact, maybe I can break it down a little simpler. If you had the name David without seeing me, when you hear the name David, you automatically, if those of you that know me, you automatically can picture me. You see me when you hear my name. Well, that's what Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is telling Moshe. When you hear my name, not only have I been seen, but Moshe, you are about to see me now. And I want you to show me, reveal me to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh is going to see me, and Pharaoh is going to experience the majesty of my presence. Okay? The Shin Mem root, Shem, comes from an ancient root, Shemeh. And this blew my mind. It actually indicates to be lofty, as in the visible. If you were in this building where we are right now, you could actually turn around and you could look behind you and you can see the arch that forms this auditorium. And so the name Shemeh actually indicates a visible arch, like the ancients would see when they looked up into the heavens. And I'm here to tell you that it is my opinion that YHVH passed on the understanding of the message that was written in the stellar luminaries to Shem as Shem crossed over the flood. Shem was the first one who was referred to as Melchizedek, the Melchizedek, the king and priest, the high priest of that Melchizedek order. And because of that, he had an understanding, if you will, of what had been written in the visible arch of the heavens. The ancients referred to that visible arch as the Merkabah, or the wheel within the wheel, which is exactly what Ezekiel is referring to when Ezekiel describes that wheel within the wheel, and it's powerful. And so that visible arch, when you see the word Shemeh, which is again connected to Shemayim and Shem, it's actually giving us an indication that there was a 360-degree cyclical or circle of witnesses in the heavens. And it's not an accident that if you looked at the numeric value of Hashemayim, it's the same as 395. And 395 is the value of a very powerful word, very familiar word, the word Mishnah. We get from that Mishneh. The word Sheneh means to double something, to copy it, to repeat something, as in an identical or an exact duplicate, but it's also the root word that's used for the English word year. And so when you see in the stellar heavens that the luminaries were set there to give us the increments of Yahweh's calendar in the Sheneh, every year, every star, every sign, every witness, every name that's written in the stellar luminaries were there to reveal an exact copy, an exact duplicate, an exact replica of what Yahweh had released out of his mouth into the stellar heavens. And then he's indicating that not only will you see it there because that's where my name is, but I am the one who was, YHVH, I am that I am. That I am that was is going to be demonstrated in the physical realm in the manifest presence in front of Moshe. That's what he was telling him. You hear that? Now, if you look at that word and the context that you see, Yehiye, you should be reminded of John chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. When John, I'm convinced, was speaking of the very same things that you and I are looking at here in Genesis chapter 1. And he's telling you who this manifest presence is. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. The same was in the beginning with Elohim. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Now look, there has to be, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that there is a clear distinction being made right there in John, just like you see here in our Torah study this afternoon, that there's a clear distinction being made between Elohim, YHVH, and El Shaddai, and also between Elohim and the Word there is mentioned in John chapter 1. And that Word has a name. And it's quite obvious that the Word existed long before the Word became a living flesh and was planted in the earth, which is exactly what the root of YHVH, Chaya, means. And so John's explaining this to you. John's identifying to you who YHVH is here in the gospel accounts, and most people just skim over the top of it and don't have a clue. In fact, in the Greek, the YHVH, or I am that I am, is referred to in the Greek as ego eimi. It's considered a God title. In fact, the Greeks would say that when an individual would say, I am that I am, he's actually saying, I am the God. And it's not an accident that in the Gospel of John, close to 30 different times, the ego eimi, the I am titles, I am that I am, the Yod He Vav He, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh, is used by our Messiah Yeshua. He makes claim to the I am that I am. Are you listening to me? This is powerful. And so, again, it should be very powerful. And it should be very clear to you. Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. When he's identifying himself to Moshe, Moshe says, who will I tell the children of Israel has sent me? And Yahweh says, tell them that Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh has sent you. I am that I am. Now, he uses that to identify the being right here in this Torah portion, Vayera, that's responsible for sending Moshe to deliver Israel. Look at the verbal root. Again, Chayah. It's loosely translated as to be. And I want you to pay close attention because most of your translators will acknowledge that Chayah, to be, is used to express both identity and existence. And it's used twice in this Torah portion in this verse that we've been looking at. Now, if according to most of the scholars, it just connotes identity alone, as in the above, I am that I am, then the being that's being identified, you really can't have a tangible certainty of who this individual is, because he's just saying, Moses is asking him, who is I, Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh? Well, I am that I am. I'm me that's been me. I'm me that is me. Well, it's almost convoluted and confusing because it doesn't really expose who the individual is, but if it's actually, in addition to identity, it's actually expressing the fact that a person exists or this being exists, then it stops being ambiguous and it becomes very conclusive and very specific. And I'm going to show you that Yahweh's identifying himself to Moshe, and he's revealing specific areas of his character, and he's expressing them in the name Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh. And I promise you that when you see who Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh is and was and who he is going to be in the near future, then it's going to help you, I believe, to grasp what Abba's doing at this particular season and why he's given Moshe this name at the specific time that he's going down into Egypt to deliver the house of Israel. It's important. Listen to this. Exodus 3, verse 13. And Moshe said unto Elohim, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, Elohim of your fathers hath sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? What shall I say unto them? Now, if you've studied the Torah, at least most of the sages and rabbis that I've looked at their commentaries, they all acknowledge that Moshe was given a code phrase that had been given to the children of Israel down through the ages by Joseph. And that phrase was that Yahweh will surely deliver you, Pakad Yivchad. And that was a code phrase. Now, if that is the truth, common sense should prevail, and if Israel was expected to know those code words, in other words, if Moshe comes to tell Israel that I am your deliverer, and he doesn't have the code phrase, then he's not going to be the deliverer, and so he's disqualified. And so if Israel is expected to know the code phrase, then I submit to you that they would have also had to have known the code name, Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, and how important that name, along with the code phrase, would be to their coming exodus. That's just common sense. Now, you should also understand that at the same time that the house of Israel and also the house of Joseph, because I don't think you can separate the two. You have the house of Judah, the house of Joseph, and their companions. I'm convinced, and I want to make sure that I emphasize this, that it's coming simultaneously with the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood, because the Melchizedek high priest is identified in this Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh title. You hear me? Now, if you understand the root of Hayah, that it's used as an identifying agent, but it's also expressing existence, and it's also clearly acknowledged by the Strong's translators. But if you do a little bit more of a critical study of the language, the syntax of the language there, and the name Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, you find that the verb hayah, not only does it express existence rather than identity, but it helps to clarify to Moshe who he is really speaking to. And so when Moshe is given the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, he's not only given an explanation that's found in that name, I am that I am, he is instantly able to understand who this being is that's speaking to me at this particular time and what my purpose is. And I'm going to show you. When you understand the root, Chayah, and you understand it is written in the stellar heavens, then the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, by literally expressing existence instead of simply just identity, it actually becomes the name or the phrase, I am the one who was, and I am now standing before you. Did you hear what I just said? And so, for Moshe to properly understand this, Moshe would have to have known not only the specific times that this identity that was standing in front of him now had been identified in the past, because was is in the past tense. You follow me? And not only would he have known the specific times down throughout history, he would have known that he had been identified by Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and even prior to that. But he would also have known, and I'm going to prove to you, that Moshe was a scholar. And Moshe knew the message written in the stellar luminaries. I'm going to prove to you. And I'm going to prove to you that Moshe was taught by Abraham, or in the same school that Abraham was taught by. And so Moshe would have known the original place that the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had been or was. And so when he's speaking to Moshe and he says, I am that I am, I'm the one that was. See, I was right there. I was there before I became manifest in the earth. Does that make sense to you? And I was here before I became manifest in the earth. And not only am I the I am that was, I am the one who is, and I'm the one who is to come. He's identifying himself as the coming deliverer of the house of Israel at another date 2,000 years later, when Messiah Yeshua would stand in the earth and make the declaration, before Abraham was, I am. Are you listening? It becomes important for you to go back and grasp these things, because Moshe had been highly educated in the schools of Egypt. And I can prove to you that the Egyptian schools taught astronomy from what had been given to them through Abraham. In fact, the Egyptian schools of astronomy came from a Chaldean or Babylonian perspective, the same way that Daniel did. And when I saw that, I thought, who was the first individual recorded that we know of from Ur of the Chaldees? Abraham. And it's important for you to grasp that this tangible presence that's associated with this name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is emphatically standing in front of Moshe now, and he's declaring, I am the one who stands. I'm the one that stood before. I'm the one who existed before I was planted in the earth. And what he's doing now is he's expressing himself through this name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, just prior to Moshe going in and confronting Pharaoh. You probably don't grasp it now, but you need to go back and look at the principal encounters that's about to take place in the next few chapters, because it's all about the plagues and the Exodus. And so the stage is being set by this very encounter here, because it's this individual who is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh that was, and that is to come. And it's at this particular season that he's going to become the principal character in that plague of the firstborn that touches the house of Israel and the house of Pharaoh at the same time. It becomes very clear as you continue to look that Yahweh wanted his name and his identity known to Moshe, Israel, and Egypt at this specific season of the year a Shane. Why? Because he's about to redo something. He's about to replicate. He's about to give you an identical, exact duplicate or copy right here physically in the earth. Well, what's it a copy of? What had been written in the stellar luminaries. And I'm here to tell you that the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was never meant to be hidden. In fact, it's my opinion that the very opposite was intended. Most of the people that you know that are from the Jewish community, a lot of the Hebrew roots, Messianics, and some Christians take offense when you vocalize Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And I'm going to show you where that error came from. I'm going to show you why it was there. I'm going to show you why it's used to this day. And if it's the case, if that name is supposed to be unspeakable, and it was always supposed, if Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was always just supposed to be the unmentionable, ineffable name, then the mystery of Elohim or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and the impossibility of ever knowing him in the character defined by that name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, is outside our grasp. Do you hear me? But what it also does is that it puts a veil in front of us between you and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And it actually, if you can't express that name vocally, how many of you have ever been in a situation when you need to call on him? What does Jeremiah 33:3 say? Call unto me and I will answer. Are you going to use a generic title? Listen to me. If you have an intimate relationship with somebody and that individual has power and authority, and you're in a situation where you need the power and authority that's vested in that individual, then you need to be able to call on that individual at that particular time. And so if you can't vocalize the name, then a veil exists between you and the name, and it denies you access to the power and authority that comes from relational intimacy with the one that's named. Hey, you. Love you, bruh. But if I really want to demonstrate power, then that in the relationship, Shepherd John and I have a close personal relationship, and it's a lot different than just using a generic a title, or just a byword or a pronoun. That's what relational intimacy is about. Does that make sense to you? If we acknowledge the connection of the name to the heavenly signs, then I submit to you that it also is part and parcel of helping to regulate the cyclical yearly seasons, the 360-day year, and the cyclical seasons known as the holy convocations that go along with it. And if that's the case, if they are intricately connected, if the name was in Shemayim, if the name was written in the stellar heavens, and I'm going to show you that the original intent at the four compass points of that wheel within a wheel, that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, according to the ancients' understanding, it was inserted in the four quadrant points. And so if I remove the understanding of that name from the stellar luminaries, then I don't understand the cyclical movement of Yahweh's calendar and his timepiece, then I might also embrace a counterfeit calendar at the same time. And if accepting these counterfeits begin to be like a set of dominoes, one domino knocks over another one, then I might be one of those individuals that is prone to accepting a rectangular wilderness tabernacle rather than a 360-degree cyclical wilderness tabernacle and a box-like shaped ark that floated on the waters of Noah's flood. And I'm here to tell you this afternoon that I believe that there has been a deliberate intent to cover up a lot of what I'm sharing with you this afternoon. Shh, you can't say that name publicly. Let me just throw this out for you. You help me out with this. Exodus 3:15, and Elohim said moreover unto Moshe, thus shall you say unto the children of Israel. Now wait. If I tell you to say something, help me out here. Somebody help me out. If I say, Shepherd John, say this, are you going to say it? Or are you just going to say, I can't say that? because it's an ineffable name. Well, I just told you to say it. Yahweh is telling Moshe, tell the children of Israel, thus shalt you say unto the children of Israel, Yahweh Elohim of your fathers, the same Elohim of Abraham, Elohim of Isaac, and Elohim of Jacob has sent me unto you. This Yod-He-Vav-He Elohim is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. If you look at that, and at present I've had nobody argue this point with me. Everybody will acknowledge it. Yes, that's his name, and that was his memorial name for throughout the generations. But then it seems as if they get about two bubbles off level. Let's look at the word for memorial. This is my memorial name. In a Western mindset, when you hear the word memorial, it's something that's lifted up in memory of someone who's done something in the past, right? And it gives you the idea that that individual existed in the past, but is not here in the present. Am I right? And so if Yahweh's telling us this is my memorial name forever unto all the generations, I'm thinking, wait a minute now. He doesn't want his name to be relegated just into the past, but he wants it to be in the present, and he wants it into the future. And so if he says, this is my name forever throughout all the generations, then it indicates that he wants his name vocalized through all the generations. Am I right? The word memorial there is the word zecher, and it's defined as a memorial or remembrance, to be recalled, to be called to mind, and context is what's important, because a lot of times we take these little sound bites out of the scripture and we take them out of context and they don't mean anything, and therefore we can twist them around and apply them to our particular traditional or our dogma, and they don't make sense. But context here tells us that his name was to be made known not only orally but written as well, and that would give you two witnesses, and that's why you find Moshe on more than one occasion saying, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today. Why? Because there was a witness in the earth and a witness in the heavens. And so now you have to ask yourself, if his name was to be memorialized, zecher, where was it first memorialized? Now, the word memorialize, again, you got to shake yourself from that Western mindset, because you're trying to think, well, that's a monument to a dead one. That's not what it means. It means that it's to be recalled. It's to be called to mind. In other words, I'm to have this name in my mind. I'm to be constantly recalling the name and having this name in my mind, not only now, but every generation in front of us. So when was the name first memorialized? Now, please consider this carefully. If we have written attestation of his name in the Hebrew text, and we do, did you know that Yod-He-Vav-He is in the Hebrew text of your scriptures almost 7,000 times? But I want it hidden. I don't want it spoken. And I don't want it written. In fact, to me, it just blows my mind. Now, if you and I, consider this carefully, if you and I are robbed of the ability to call forth the power in a vocal testament of his name, then what are the possible ramifications in the times of crises when you cannot call on his name? It's incredible. In fact, Psalm 19 verses 2 and 3 tell us that the heavens literally speak day and night of his name and testify of him. Revelation 12:11 says, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Clearly, knowing the one in whom you have believed and being able to vocalize or invoke his name causes one to become persuaded that he's able to keep what you committed to him against that day. How many in here, I just want to ask you a question, have an intimate relationship with someone? How hard would it be, Tim, for the last 35 years for you to refer to her as her? You can't vocalize your wife's name. The intimacy's abrogated. You understand what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to make this as plain as I can, but this is what we're dealing with here. I want you to understand that Yahweh is introducing himself to Moshe as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh for a specific reason, and we've been taught that we couldn't even validate his existence by speaking that name. Now, it's interesting because if you look at that word, Zeker for memorial has a numeric value of 227, the same as the Hebrew word Bechorah, which means firstborn or birthright. And so it's my opinion that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh becomes the one who initiates our deliverance. Listen to me. That's why he's identifying himself to Moshe right now as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, because I'm the one that's about to initiate. I'm going to set your deliverance into motion. How many of you have ever been in a situation or think that there may be an instance in the days in front of you when you may need deliverance? If you do, or if you have, then you need to call on Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Why? Because he was before he was planted in the earth. Once he was planted in the earth, he transitions through the spirit realm, the womb, into this natural plane that we're living in right now. And he breached that womb first here in Egypt, Babylon, and then the moment that he identifies himself to Moshe and the children of Israel as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, his name becomes a vault. This blew my mind when the Holy Spirit speaking to me when I'm writing this stuff down. His name becomes a vault, and the vault contains everything that's pertaining to your inheritance. And if you're denied access to that name, the vault's sealed off, and you can never fully access what rightfully belongs to you. We said this earlier. Healing is mine, deliverance is mine, salvation is mine, but it's wrapped up inside the name. My goodness. I thought this is interesting because we're shortly in the next couple of Torah portions, we're going to be dealing with the plagues and the events that all are precursors to the coming Exodus. And right now at this specific timing, just before you see Passover initiated, you find that this name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, becoming extremely pertinent and prominent. And it's interesting because he's telling you to memorialize his name to Zechariah at the same time that he's about to give us an idea through this last plague, the 10th plague, of the status of both the Bechorah, the Zeker of Egypt, and the Bechorah, the firstborn of Israel. And it's interesting that not only would the firstborn of Israel be sacrificed, they would have died had not the firstborn of Elohim been offered. Did you hear what I just said? And so it's the firstborn of Elohim that has now been birthed through the womb in the spirit realm, birthed into the earth. And it's this firstborn of Elohim calling himself Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the one that is identified when John speaks to him having baptized him. Yahweh himself speaks out of the heaven and he says, "Behold my son." And so that's what's happening right here when Moshe is being introduced to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Egypt symbolizes the world, and it should not be lost on the reader that Hosea 11:1 declares that Elohim would call his son out of Egypt. Remember that? I'm telling you that he's going into Egypt right now. Listen to me. I'd never thought about this until this particular Torah portion. I believe that Israel was called Yahweh's son, and Yahweh tells us that Israel is my firstborn. But I also am convinced that right here at the boundary, the doorway about to go down into Egypt, Yahweh sends this messenger, which is the manifest presence, the one who was and is to come, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I am that I am. The living son of Elohim is about to go down into Egypt with Moshe and the children of Israel. And he literally becomes their deliverer. You can see the same thing in Matthew chapter 2:15, where Yeshua's family flees to Egypt again to escape Herod's judgment. And what most fail to realize is that this same message had already been written for eons in the stellar luminaries, the zodiacal heavens. Let me show you. At the timing, you don't have to take my word for this. If you do your due diligence and research it, you'll find that I'm telling you the truth. At the time of the Exodus, the ruling sign in the stellar heavens was called the shur, the ox, or the bull. It's interesting because parshah, his great house, could also be indicating the house of the bull. And so this bull or this shur has a dual reference. It could have been the house of Pharaoh, and it could have also been the house of Joseph, because one of the signs of the house of Joseph was the ox or the reem. Do y'all hear that? Okay? And so there is a changing of the luminaries, the controlling signs about to take place. At the time that the Exodus occurs, the bull is in control. But Moshe and this Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh represents the one who's about to change the sign, and it's the sign of Aries, the ram. And so it would have been necessary, pay attention and look at this, it would have been necessary in the stellar heavens to see, oh look, what's about to happen. Right there is Egypt, and this sun, S-U-N, who makes it circle through the heavens, the sun, S-O-N, is about to go down into this sign representing Egypt. And so the sun goes down into Egypt. And out of Egypt I called my son. And if you go back and look in Matthew chapter 2, you'll find that there was a changing of the stellar luminaries from Aries to that of Pisces. And then from Pisces, 2,000 years later, you and I are on the cusp of, in fact, we've already entered into the age called the age of Aquarius. And the sun is about to come down into Egypt again. And when the sun comes down into Egypt again, I'm telling you, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is about to arrive on the scene, manifest himself in the priesthood of the Melchizedek order, and you're about to see some powerful demonstrations of the majesty of the Creator in the earth. There are a lot of people that for multiplied generations have understood the truth of the message in the stars and the connection to the tetragrammaton, the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, with the four columns or quadrants or divisions or seasons, if you will, that's depicted in the stellar luminaries. Again, it's called the Merkabah or Ezekiel's wheel. Yod is seen in the first 3 months, beginning in Aries, the beginning of months. I'm going to show you why Moshe is told in Exodus chapter 12, this shall be the beginning of months. Why? Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is stepping on the scene, and he's going there for a reason. He's about to change the calendar that Israel had been keeping. Egypt had a different calendar at that time than what Israel was supposed to. They were supposed to be keeping the Melchizedek calendar of 360 days, 12 months or 30 years, and they had gotten away from that. They were keeping a 365-day Egyptian calendar. And he's going to realign things. And he realigns it when he steps down here in the person of our Messiah, Yeshua. And guess what? As we speak, people think, man, you're a lunatic. Lunatic means you're consumed with the moon. Lunar tick. I got news for you. All the moon is supposed to do is regulate the tides. Let me just explain something to you. Right now, as we speak, whether you will understand it or not, you're keeping a Gregorian calendar. Amen? According to the Gregorian calendar, today is January the 20th. You're more than likely familiar with Hillel calendar, which was put us in, the 11th month of the Hebrew calendar. Some of you may have been keeping a physical calendar based on the tax year. Say amen or oh me, it's the truth. But I'm here to tell you, and I've been looking at this for 15 years, that there is also a genuine calendar hidden within these calendars that I've been looking for, and I believe Abba's beginning to reveal the truth behind it, and we can keep Yahweh's Melchizedek creational calendar and be at the right time, at the right place. Say amen. If you've got Yod with the first 3 months, Vav with the second 3 months, Hey with the third month, and then the final 3 months the letter Hey, Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. In between those, you got 1, 2, 3, 12, 3, 6, 9. Can you see that? In between those, you'd have a line that would bisect them. And that line bisects, it goes straight across 180 degrees across, which should give you 180 days. Did you know that between Passover and Sukkot, based on a 360-day calendar year, there should be exactly 180 days? Come on now. And it's interesting because if you look at the beginning of the first month and the last month, you'll find that they set in motion the spring and the autumn equinox. And I felt, my goodness, as we begin to look at it, it actually points to that fixed plane between the cycles that gives us an indicator of what time the year is to begin, when we're supposed to celebrate the holy convocations, and when we're supposed to be in His presence. And listen to me, it's important because in the days that's in front of us, there is going to arise one, and I know we've talked about it a million times. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, I believe, it talks about the anti-Messiah going to change the times and seasons. He's done that before, and I'm going to tell you something. We're about to see a diabolical, even more than that, changing of the times, because inside the Messianic Hebrew roots and Jewish community, there is a maddening push to embrace the calendar of Enoch, Zadok, and Hillel. And I'm had something to do with an Easter communion. But what I am telling you is that he was reminding his Talmudim, his disciples, of a change in the calendar and the fixed memorial that had been in the stellar luminaries. And that's why when you find them asking him, what about the Passover? And he says, go find a man bearing a pitcher of water. Remember that? The man bearing a pitcher of water is an anomaly because men did not carry water in the social climate of that day. The man bearing a pitcher of water was a picture, a shadow picture, if you will, in the zodiacal heavens of the sign Aquarius. And he sent two of his disciples representing Pisces, the house. Guess what? He also was pointing to celebrating the Passover, the sign of Aries. Everything that he was sharing was pointing to the fact that the calendar was about that. He was implementing a fixed calendar, and he was returning the focus on what had been written in the stellar heavens from the very beginning. And it's linked to Passover and the harvest festival of Sukkot, and you cannot separate the two. And so I had to ask the question, do you think that it was possible that Israel, while in Egypt, that just like the present day outcast, listen, Revelation 18:4, we're all declaring we're coming out of her, right? Coming out of Babylon. Babylon's got a calendar. I can prove to you during what we call the Passion Week of our Messiah Yeshua, that there is a reference to 3 different calendars that are kept. I can prove to you that the Roman calendar is referenced. I can prove to you that the lunar calendar of the Jewish community that was prominent during that particular time was being referenced. And I can also prove to you that our Messiah was keeping a 360-day cyclical Melchizedek redemption creation calendar. And once you begin to see that, it helps you to understand all of the confusion and where it would originate from. Well, they came to the tomb at this particular time. Well, was he having 2 different Passovers? Didn't he celebrate Passover on a Tuesday and on a Wednesday afternoon? What was he doing? Why was it that when his mother and father were there to celebrate a festival that they lost their son and had to turn around and go back and find him? Why did Yeshua tell his mother, don't you understand? I have to be about my Father's business. Go back and study it. He was operating on a fixed calendar that was different than the Talmudim, than the Jews at that particular day were celebrating. And he was in the tabernacle identifying himself during a pilgrimage festival just like had been commanded from day one. Skip down a little bit. The necessity of the sign of the sun, S-U-N, S-O-N, in the person of Yahweh going down into Egypt, also known as Taurus, the shore, the ox, the bull, at the juncture with Aries at what was the spring equinox, was a means to reset the time clock for Israel's deliverance. That's why when you see the closing out of the Exodus, that they understood it was exactly 430 days, 430 years to that day. They knew it. It was fixed. The same clock shift happened at the nativity of Yeshua, where Aries was changed to Pisces, and then later it's going to be changed from Pisces to the sign of the house of Aquarius. I want you to look with me in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. I'm going to show you that there's another confirmation here. How many of you have ever looked at Revelation chapter 12, the sun-clothed woman? This is mind-staggering, because it says that there appears a great wonder in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. The reason that you see this, because at the same time, there's another prominent figure to this sun-clothed woman. The other prominent figure is the red dragon. And this red dragon is angry. Why? Because it says there in the same text that he realizes his time is short. Why is that important for you to grasp? It's because a calendar change is taking place. Yahweh's reorienting the calendar, and he's calling attention, getting us to focus our attention on that sun-clothed woman, which is exactly what Joseph was testifying of when he talked about the 12 stars and the sun and the moon. Look at the word for clothed here. Perebalo. It means to clothe oneself. It comes from a root that means to make a circuit, to revolve around something, as in a place or a time. It's equivalent to the Hebrew word eber or abar, to cross over, to stand in opposition. And then it has the root balo, to throw or to scatter. And if you look at it, what it's literally telling you is that this sun-clothed woman is being revealed for a purpose. And her purpose is to scatter the place and the time, to bring to destruction the calendar that is being kept at that particular time. And she's restoring a different calendar where you have the sun and the 12 stars, referring us all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, and the institution of the Melchizedek redemption calendar, the memorial of Yahweh that had been written in the stellar heavens. And the sun and the moon and the stars were there to regulate a 360-day year, 12 months of 30 days. And I know your argument. It's an established fact that right now the year is 365 days. Something is going to happen, and I can prove to you throughout history that there's been instances where the calendar has been affected because of some kind of a cataclysmic event. I believe the flood of Noah was one of those. Joshua, when the sun and the moon both stood in a fixed position. And then you have Hezekiah's sundial. And I'm going to prove to you, well, it's probably going to take a couple of more teaching, but I'm going to prove to you that those are very significant. And in the days in front of us, it wouldn't take much for the calendar, for something to happen to affect the calendar right now as we speak. In fact, the polar shift is taking place at a means of 35, I believe, miles a day. Did you hear what I just said? And so what used to be east or used to be north, if you looked at a fixed position, and a number of years ago we were doing some map reading at Camp Tadmore, and we had General Crawford there. And he took us and was showing us the difference between the map north and magnetic, the compass and stuff. And he acknowledged that the military knows that there's been shifting and there's difference. And I'm telling you this for a reason. There's something going, I don't know exactly what it may take. It may be some kind of an earthquake. Abba's going to do something himself. I don't know what it'll take, but I believe that there's something going to happen to put us to back to a 360-day year. In the meanwhile, I believe that we can keep a 360-day festival cycle. Amen? Yeshua said, do this in remembrance of me. The Greek word for that word remembrance in Luke chapter 24 is anamnesis. And in the Septuagint, it's the same as the Hebrew word used for memorial, azkara, from the word zecher. And let me ask you this. What do you think Yeshua is doing when he's getting the communion wine and the communion wafers out? Do you actually think that he's telling his disciples, I want you to remember this as you celebrate your Easter communion? Do you think maybe he's declaring, listen, what you're about to do, you may not understand now, but this is a rehearsal. And he's not talking about this simple rehearsal of pouring wine into a cup and breaking bread. It's not talking about that rehearsal. He's talking about the entire scope of the events that's taken place during that Passion Week that had been written in the stellar luminaries. That's the memorial that he's referring to. You're listening to me. And he's saying when you do this, it's to remind you. Every time you do this at this particular season, it's to remind you that I went down into Egypt at this season to deliver you. And now I'm going down into Egypt again to deliver you. And he's telling them, listen, I am the one who was and is to come. I am the one that existed before the foundation of the world. I am the one that formed Adam. I'm the Word made flesh. I'm the deliverer of Israel from Egypt. I'm the lamb slain. I'm the ram in the thicket with Abraham. I'm the architect of Noah's boat. I'm the ladder of Jacob's dream. I am the one who is with you, and I will be with you until the end of the world. And you've got scriptural evidence in Psalm 19 that the heavens speak and vocalize the name of our Messiah, Yeshua, and he is in fact the I am. He said it himself. There is no scripture, not one, that tells us to hide, to not pronounce, or to substitute a hybrid name for Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. In fact, the quite opposite is found. The letters Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh are found in the Hebrew text almost 7,000 times. And some would argue, well, you see, you're not supposed to make the name common. And that's when you hear them refer to the commandment, don't take my name in vain. Well, this means make his name common. It means you shouldn't speak his name very often. I would love to hear my children and my wife and my grandchildren say my name as often as they would. How many of you know that there's something about somebody calling you by your name? And I'm convinced that that's what Abba intended from the very beginning. If that wasn't, then why place it in a text that's going to be read by multiplied millions of generations, except, and this is for argument's sake, that maybe if the name does represent a mysterious entity that can't be identified, you can't speak his name, and that he's supposed to be confined to the text of the Tanakh. And so listen to me carefully. If that mysterious being is confined just to the text of the Tanakh, then I'll never know who he was. But if I can understand that he was also found outside the Tanakh in what we refer to as the Brit Hadashah, and that he is also that manifest presence, and he referred to himself as the I am in John almost 30 times, then I submit to you that there's a good reason for hiding the name if I want to make him unidentifiable as well. Or if I want to bring a reproach on him for associating himself with the name. If that's the case, and I didn't want him identified, and I didn't want him associated with Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, then what I would do everything I could to make it harmful to those that would speak the name, and especially those that would associate him with the name. In fact, I would kill him for being associated with the name. Wouldn't I want him to remain a mystery and hidden from the generations if it affected my Talmudic beliefs? Listen, I'm not talking about Torah, I'm talking about the Talmud. Did you hear what I said? And if, like Israel in Egypt, we are assured of a future greater exodus, and I believe we are, I believe our deliverance is just in front of us. And if that's the case, just like Israel, we need to know the exact calculations for the day of our deliverance, because I don't want to be late. I want to have my bags packed and ready at the door. I want to be ready. Say amen. Do you think maybe that taking the name in vain means to ignore it, to obfuscate it, to substitute it, or otherwise hide it? You think maybe by not cultivating an interest in the name or understanding the name of Yahweh that I'm taking the name in vain? I think that's a more appropriate definition. In fact, I'm convinced that the name sets the yearly calendar. I'm convinced that the name, the word was there at creation, separating light from darkness. The spring equinox, represented by the yod, initiates or begins the month and is known as the dawning of the day or the dawning of the year, while the autumnal equinox, the vav, sets in motion the months leading to darkness and the final hay. And if you look at it, they reveal in the heavens the zodiacal eternal name Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. It's well known that the 3 spring months represent light, while the last 3 months of winter represent darkness. And so the 7th month festivals of autumn are set in motion in close proximity to the fall equinox of a 365-day year. How much more precise when we are able to observe a 360-day year. And it's here at their conclusion that we have the beginning of a season called Erev, giving us a morning and an evening, if you will. And if the spring cycle is set in motion as a beginning, and it's represented by an aleph at the equinox, then perhaps we ought to look a little bit closer at the aleph, because it's intentionally associated with the beginning of the calendar. And the ox is usually depicted as an ox's head, indicating the plowing action of that animal and the implement or the plow that it would be pulling. And it's consistent with the idea of spring or morning as light plows through the darkness of the 10th, 11th, and 12th Hebrew months. And you need to remember, light has no mixture. Light doesn't have darkness, while darkness has no light. It's only, listen to me carefully, sundown and dawn that reveal a mixture. And when I began to see this, I had to go back and revisit how I would, for the last 30 years, have been calculating the beginning of the way we would keep the days. I've been taught for the last 30 years that we would begin from evening and evening. I'm convinced now, you'll have to do this on your own, I'm convinced now that we should begin from dawn to the following dawn to calculate it. And Elohim said, Genesis 1, 3 through 5, let there be light, and there was light. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good, and Elohim divided the light from the darkness, no mixture. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. Let's look at the word for evening, erev, evening. It's not sunset or dusk as most assume. It happens, erev begins the darkness. It comes from a root that means to mingle, to intermix, but it also conveys the idea of covering something, just like I've covered myself with this coat. This covering hides a true form. Erev could be just before dark, also called twilight, and Erev could be just before daybreak, also called twilight. Did you hear me? And the evening and the morning. The word morning here is boker. It means to plow or to break it open, to cleave something open. And so I put in my notes, is it possible that we've, in my case, me, thought as an evening to evening calculation for the first day was actually saying, as the dawning or the covered form of the light begins or is cleaved or plowed open, it exposes the full light, and we have day one. If so, then I've been wrong, and I'm publicly making this declaration. I've been wrong for 30 years, and I believe that the day begins at dawn and ends at dawn the following morning. And I repent publicly, because these calculations affect our calendar, and it also affects the timing of Yeshua's execution. Let's look at this word, thou shalt not take the name in vain. Exodus 27, thou shalt not take the name of Yahweh your Elohim in vain, for Yahweh will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. It's translated, it comes from the word nasa, to lift, to bear, to carry, and it seems that it actually infers the idea of taking upon yourself that name. And it also indicates, at the same time, to use deceptive methods to achieve your purpose. It can hint at standing against something or inciting something. And it also has the same nun sheen root that indicates to cause to forget, as in Joseph's son Manasseh. Now, once more, I want to remind you that ancient Near Eastern tradition required the oral recounting of family and national history. Did you hear me? And if Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was the God of Israel, oral history would require the recounting of his name and all of his exploits. And that would ensure the lifting up of his name. And the connection here to this name, Manasseh, it has a numeric value of 395, the same as Hashemayim. And when you see Joseph calling his son Manasseh, the King James English gives you the idea that Joseph calls him that because Manasseh made me forget all my troubles. That's not what the name means. Manasseh literally became a memorial or a sign in his father's face to remind Joseph of the redemption message that had been written in the stellar heavens, of which he was a shadow picture. Joseph was a shadow picture of the deliverer, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, just like the picture of the sun, moon, and stars bowing down to him. Don't take his name in vain. It means emptiness, to make worthless, to commit evil, to bring to destruction or to ruin. It would seem then that the admonition is to not hide the name from view, rather that if one bears that name, that you would do it like a family name, which was the original intent towards Adam, and that you should not forget the author or the originator of that name, and that you should not use the name for deceptive measures or to cause others to do so, else you destroy the purpose of the name. You can't affect the name itself, but you can affect the purpose of the name in your life and other people's lives. And there are multiple, listen to me, I'm going to hit this real quick. There are multiple texts where the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is used in an informal greeting outside of a religious context, and you can see that in Ruth chapter 2 and in Judges chapter 6. So you have to ask yourself, if this word Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is considered the ineffable name, why did they not sanction the use of Elohim and El Shaddai? Is it possible that there's been collusion going on here and that they understood that the one that's being referenced by the name and he and his identity that they were trying to suppress? Because I'm convinced that they knew that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh would be coming to manifest himself. That's the Messiah that they were looking for. Exodus chapter 23, verse 13. And in all that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of your mouth. If you read that, and you read it in its context, the natural conclusion from reading that verse is that there are no restrictions upon the mention of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh's name. And now I'm going to show you why the name's been restricted. There are two instances in the gospel accounts, Matthew 26:64 and Mark 14:62, where Yeshua is accused of blasphemy. And both of those accounts are regarding his trial and later execution. I'm going to put the former one here. And Yeshua saith unto him, who is to him? Pilate. Pilate was a Roman. And Pilate is visited by his wife. And there's some things that are taking place when that visit with his wife comes to pass that can prove to you that she was and Pilate were keeping a Roman calendar. And he said unto him, You have said, Nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Look at that word power there. Hold your finger. Because Yeshua is accused of blasphemy. And history reveals that the ineffable name tradition came into prominence between 100 and 300 A.D. And this is from evidence existing of a scribal error in the Septuagint of 257 BC's translation of Leviticus 24:16. And they translated it this way. And he that names the name of Yahweh shall be surely put to death, and all the congregation shall stone him. Remember that, as well as the stranger, as he that is born in the land. When he blasphemed, notice, they insert blaspheme here. Why did they insert blaspheme? It should originally have been blaspheme. An individual that blasphemes the name is worthy of death. And if you blaspheme the name, that means you have insulted it and denigrated the name, right? Yeshua was never guilty of that. The only way that he could denigrate it and insult it by us is taking the name upon himself. Am I right? But they have equated just naming the name with blasphemy, and that's the prevalent tradition today. If you name the name publicly, it's like akin to blasphemy. That particular error in the Septuagint is corroborated and embraced in the text of the Manual of Discipline found in the Qumran Scrolls and in Yoma 3841 and others, of which each one of them adhere to the doctrine of the name's ineffability. In any case, because of the mistranslation resulting in, and he that names the name of Yahweh, the idea that his name could not be vocalized or put in a written form became the standard for that day and is still the standard today. And it completely, in my mind, just destroys the intent of 7,000 occurrences in the Hebrew text of that name alone. And furthermore, if Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is historically and biblically connected to the signs in the heavens that testify of him, and they testify of how the calendar is fixed with the holy convocations, then maybe the intent is to hide both the calendar and the name from the people. And if I can hide the name and the 360-day calendar because of the connection to Yeshua as the restorer of the Melchizedek priestly covenant calendar, then I have accomplished my goal, and that is to deny and to denigrate his existence. But I can prove to you that Yeshua restored the true calendar as well as what really happened when he is accused of blasphemy. Now, as we continue, contrary to the death penalty for simply speaking the name, I contend speaking the name restores the obvious link to the Melchizedek calendar. The Hebrew text tells us only blasphemy of the name was considered criminal and a capital offense. As I said, blasphemy was insulting the name. But now, even today, and in the days of Yeshua's time, most of Talmudic and rabbinic scholars and a lot of my Hebrew roots family still believe in the mistranslated Septuagint, and they believe that simply pronouncing the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is blasphemy. And I'm convinced that it was used to convict Yeshua based on the Septuagint's twisted view of blasphemy. And I'm going to show you why. During Yeshua's trial, he was indeed accused of blasphemy. So you have to ask yourself what merited his accusation. Did he insult Yahweh in either Matthew or Mark? No, insulting wasn't the crime of Yeshua. Remember, in their own writings, the Sanhedrin, chapter 7, verse 5, quoted from the sacred name, the blasphemer is not culpable, he's not guilty. Listen to me, it's in their own writings. He's not guilty unless he exactly pronounces his name. And you can see there's an evidence in the Mishnah. And it says, on every day, listen to this carefully. See if you can note some things that happened during Yeshua's execution or in his trial. On every day, they examined the witnesses with a substituted name. When the sentence was to be given, they did not declare him guilty of death with a substituted name, but sent out all the people and asked the chief among witnesses. They brought witnesses in against Yeshua, and they said, say exactly what you heard. And upon hearing it, listen to this, the judges would stand to their feet, and what did they do? They would rend their garments and may not rend them again. This completed the procedure of convicting one guilty of blasphemy, and that's exactly what Caiaphas did when he heard Yeshua's remarks. And Yeshua would have had to have pronounced exactly the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, or they could not have publicly condemned him. And because they did hear him say it, he rends his garment. He's guilty. But if you go back and read it, it seems as if the texts of Matthew and Mark from the King James versions don't mention Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, or do they? Yeshua said unto him, thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. What you find is a deliberate omission of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Because when you see that word power, it was a well-known euphemistic term used as a substitute for Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Why would it have been used as a substitute? It was because Yeshua declared that. You will see the Son of Man coming, and you will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and coming in the clouds of heaven. And it resulted then, when he makes that declaration, it resulted in him being accused of blasphemy and renting of the priest's garment. And it also resulted in one of the methods used in capital punishment. Yeshua was crucified according to Roman capital punishment, but he was also stoned according to this particular requirement for capital punishment for blaspheming the name while he was hanging on the cross, the execution stake. Can y'all hold on? I got 3 or 4 more slides. Scriptural evidence abound where Yahweh chose the message in the heavens as a means to communicate. Genesis 15 with Abraham. Can you tell the stars? With Jacob. Jacob places a model of these same luminaries around his head after he's had his dream. Just like Revelation 12, where the 12 stars become his crown. And he is clothed with the sun, and the moon would have been under his feet. And what it did was relegate to insignificance the calendars that were being kept at that time. Now, evidence exists declaring that Abraham, and I believe Abraham would have been the second high priest in the earth after Shem, according to the order of Melchizedek. And evidence exists proving that Abraham, listen to me carefully, spent time in Egypt teaching astronomy. He communicated to them arithmetic and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abraham came to Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning, for that science came from the Chaldeans into Egypt, and Abraham from the Chaldeans, Flavius Josephus, page 39. Abraham was taught in the tents of Shem. He, the Shem, the Melchizedek, would have taught not only Abraham, but Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Joseph would have been taught the stellar luminaries and their message, and Joseph would have taught the very same to the Egyptians. But in Moses' day, right now, in the time of this Torah portion, a Pharaoh rises up who says not only does he not know Joseph, but he does not want to acknowledge Yahweh. And I'm convinced that it's because that he wanted to be the one recognized as the preeminent king in the stellar luminaries, not the one who was coming. And he understood that the signs were about to change, and he did not want to give up his position as the deity that was worshipped and representing the house of Egypt. Can you say amen? Now, I put out a ton of information, and I challenge you to do what 2 Timothy 2:15 says, to go back and research for yourself. I believe with everything in me that Abba is about to realign his calendar. And I want to be at the right time and right place. I do not want to mess up. I want to be able to hear him carefully. I want to be able to call on him in times of trouble. I believe that it's restoring the language. I believe that it's restoring the name. I believe it's restoring the Melchizedek priestly order, and I believe it's restoring the calendar. All of these simultaneously, and I'm convinced that he's doing it for a reason, and that's because he has a group of people that are being shaped and formed into his image, and you need to rise up, almighty man and woman of valor, and equip yourself like men and become the person that Abba's called you to be, and quit fooling around with all the frivolous junk that has been captivating your attention, and work towards cultivating the relationship with him that will enable you to fulfill what you have been called to do. Before you were formed in your mother's womb, he prophesied over you. And that's why you're where you are right now. As Shepherd John alluded to, there are a lot of these false shepherds that are about to be judged. And I'm going to tell you, this is a powerful thing to say. As they're being judged, the judgment that falls on the house that they have positions of authority over, those that are sitting under them willfully are going to incur the same judgment. Come out of her. We thought Babylon represented the structural world in opposition to Yahweh. No, I'm convinced that this Babylon is the counterfeit whore that looks like the church and calling herself the church and clothed like the church. Come out of her, or else you'll be visited with the very same plagues. I hope that this meant something to you. Shalom.